She said it in a room full of people, like it was a correction, not an accusation. Her voice stayed calm, professional, the kind she used with clients who thought they were important. She told him to stop acting like he was entitled to touch her. She didn't say my name, but she didn't have to. We were at a rooftop mixer downtown, the kind with glass railings and catered plates no one touched. Her agency logo looped on a screen behind the bar. Investors, developers, gym owners. People who shook hands like they were closing deals, even when they were just saying hello. I'd come straight from shift, still smelling like smoke and metal, uniform jacket swapped for a plain button-down. I stood half a step behind her, where I always stood at these things. David Cross was close. Too close. His hand had drifted to the small of her back like it belonged there. When I shifted, when my fingers brushed her arm without thinking, she turned just enough to freeze me out. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look embarrassed. She looked efficient. People around us pretended not to hear. That's what they do when status makes a mess. Someone laughed too loud near the bar. Glass clinked. The city kept glowing behind the windows. David smiled like this wasn't awkward at all. Like he'd just won something small, but meaningful. She went on talking about expansion, about square footage, about how flexible the lease terms could be. David nodded, already picturing his logo on another building. 12 clubs wasn't enough, apparently. He wanted more. Bigger. Closer to downtown money. I didn't say anything. I didn't step in. I didn't correct her. I felt the room rearrange itself without me, like furniture being moved while you're standing still. Someone asked what I did for a living. She answered before I could. Fire department. Shift supervisor. She said it fast, like a disclaimer. David glanced at my hands, at the faint burn scar that never fully faded. He nodded again, polite, uninterested. Then he leaned into her, said something low. She smiled the kind of smile she never used on me anymore. I left early. No scene. No goodbye tour. I told the valet my ticket number and waited in silence. That night, the station bunk felt cleaner than our bedroom. I stayed. The next morning, I stayed again. By the end of the week, my side of the closet was untouched. My coffee mug was still at the station. My phone stayed face down. She didn't notice right away. She was busy building something bigger. The first crack didn't come from her. It came from someone who had no reason to protect the picture she was selling. 2 days after the mixer, my captain slid his phone across the metal table in the break room while the coffee burned on the warmer. He didn't say anything at first, just tapped the screen once with his finger and leaned back. The photo wasn't dramatic. That's what made it land. It showed a familiar skyline through floor-to-ceiling glass, city lights blurred into gold. In the reflection, I recognized her posture before I registered her face. Hair down, jacket off, a champagne flute raised mid-gesture. David Cross stood close enough that their shoulders touched, his hand resting where cameras never accidentally catch. The caption under the post wasn't hers. It was tagged, private event, post-presentation wind down. The kind of language people use when they want intimacy to sound like work. The captain said someone from City Permitting had mentioned it at a charity dinner. Big fitness guy. Penthouse. Deals always moving faster after dark. He didn't look at me when he spoke. He didn't need to. I slid the phone back. Said nothing. Finished my coffee. The alarm went off 5 minutes later, and we were moving. Boots on concrete. Air tanks clanging. Fire doesn't wait for explanations. That night, I stayed again. The station hummed the way it always does at 2 a.m., quiet broken by radio chatter and the distant thump of engines on the highway. I lay on the bunk staring at the ceiling, phone untouched on the table beside me. She sent a photo around midnight. Not of him. Of a skyline from a different angle. A glass of wine. No caption. Just enough to remind me she was somewhere expensive. I didn't respond. The next morning, I checked the joint account between calls. A charge stood out. Not groceries. Not utilities. A private car service I'd never used, routed through a corporate expense line I didn't recognize. The amount wasn't outrageous. It was intentional. By the end of the week, there were more. Dinners that looked like meetings. Hotel bars billed to client relations. Nothing explicit. Everything deniable. She came home once. Late. Heels in her hand. She moved through the apartment like I wasn't there. Already talking into her phone. Already somewhere else. I stayed in the bedroom. She didn't knock. At the station, the guys started inviting me out after shift. Training sessions. Barbecue behind the bay doors. Laughter that didn't ask questions. She texted on Friday afternoon, asking if I was picking up dry cleaning. I was already suited up, mask hanging at my side, radio crackling. I left the message unread. Something had shifted, and she still thought it was temporary. By the second week, patterns replaced suspicion. You don't have to dig when someone stops hiding. I started noticing the timing. Her calendar alerts lighting up the shared tablet on the kitchen counter while I was tying my boots at the station. Client dinner. Follow-up drinks. Late presentation. Always evenings I was scheduled for a double shift. Always ending after midnight. Always framed as progress. The apartment stayed untouched. My jacket hung where I'd left it. My side of the bed stayed cold. She didn't ask where I was sleeping. She assumed she knew. Between calls, I checked what mattered. Not messages. Not photos. Movement. The lease documents she kept synced to the cloud updated more often than usual. Addendums. Extensions. David Cross's company name appeared again and again, threaded deeper into her portfolio. She was consolidating risk around him, tying her growth to his signature. A friend from finance sent me something without commentary. A screenshot of a corporate expense ledger floating around a private group chat. Names blurred. One wasn't. David's. Reimbursements for consulting hospitality. Hotels I recognized from skyline shots she'd sent me. Numbers that didn't flinch. I didn't forward it. I didn't save it. I closed it and went back to work. The firehouse kept me busy. Training runs turned longer. Extra drills. I volunteered for weekend coverage without being asked. No one questioned it. Firefighters disappear into work all the time. It's expected. It's respectable. She noticed my absence indirectly. The mail piled up. Packages sat by the door unopened. The fridge emptied out faster than she remembered. She started sending logistical texts instead of emotional ones. Questions with answers she could control. I didn't answer those either. On Sunday, someone tagged me in a photo online. A group shot after a charity stair climb, sweat-soaked shirts, helmets off, faces raw and smiling. I hadn't posted it. I didn't need to. It existed anyway. That night, she searched for me. I know because her profile popped up viewing my page for the first time in months. She scrolled through photos she hadn't been part of. Me standing between guys she'd never bothered to learn the names of. Me laughing in places she didn't belong. Her message came an hour later. Casual. Asking if I was okay. Asking if work was crazy. I let it sit. Monday morning, I moved my direct deposit. Quietly. No announcement. No argument. Just a form submitted between alarms. By the time she realized something structural had changed, the foundation was already set. She was still negotiating influence. I was already rerouting my life. The disappearance wasn't dramatic. That's why it worked. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't leave a note. I just stopped driving home. The station had a spare locker room with an unused bunk from an old renovation. I claimed it without ceremony. Dropped my gear. Hung my uniform. The guys assumed I was riding out a rough patch. No one pushed. In this job, silence is a language everyone understands. She noticed the absence in pieces. First the nights. Then the mornings. Then the way the apartment stayed exactly as she left it, like a place between tenants. Her text shifted tone again. Fewer logistics. More checking. She asked if I was alive. She added a joke emoji to soften it. I let it pass. On Wednesday, she called the station. Not my phone. The front desk. She asked if I was working overtime. The answer was yes. It always was. That night, I sat outside behind the bay doors with a paper plate balanced on my knee, smoke drifting up from the grill. Someone handed me a beer. Someone else told a story that ended in laughter. I stayed off my phone. Across town, she posted a photo from a rooftop I'd never been to. No people. Just glass, steel, and city. It got more likes than usual. David's name showed up early in the list. I didn't react. By the end of the second week, she came to the station herself. I wasn't there. Training run out of district. She stood in the lobby too well dressed for the space. Heels echoing on concrete, smile tight. The captain later told me she looked surprised when she realized how small everything was. How utilitarian. That night, she messaged that we needed to talk. Not now. Soon. When I was free. I didn't open it. Instead, I posted a photo for the first time in years. Nothing polished. Just the crew after a long shift, faces tired, arms slung over shoulders. No caption. No explanation. By the third week, she found it. She scrolled through my page like she was piecing together a map she'd ignored before. Me at training. Me at a barbecue. Me alive in places she hadn't been invited to. Her message came late, shorter than the others. She asked if I even cared anymore. I waited 8 hours before answering. Not to make a point. Because I was working. I told her I was on shift. That we'd talk when I was free. Then I went back inside. I didn't become free. I didn't go looking for David Cross. I didn't need to. Men like him leave trails when they move fast. The city does business in layers. Permits. Inspections. Zoning reviews that slow things down just enough to remind everyone who actually controls the ground. I'd learned that over the years, standing on sidewalks at 3 in the morning, watching buildings breathe smoke. Structures tell the truth eventually. A building inspector I knew mentioned something in passing while we were waiting on an all-clear. One of Cross's newer clubs had been flagged for minor violations. Nothing dramatic. Nothing public. Paperwork problems. The kind that stall expansion quietly. I didn't react. I didn't ask questions. I just listened. A week later, another comment surfaced. A delay on a lease approval. An investor getting nervous. Nothing tied to me. Nothing with fingerprints. Meanwhile, she doubled down. Her posts grew louder. More polished. Photos with captions about growth, vision, momentum. David appeared more often now. Always cropped just enough to look intentional. Their proximity wasn't hidden anymore. It was curated. She stopped pretending it was temporary. She showed up at the station again. This time I was there. I saw her from across the bay, standing near the engines like she was touring a museum. She didn't wave. She waited. I stayed where I was, finishing a report. When I finally walked past, she tried to catch my eye. I nodded once. Neutral. Professional. Like she was a visitor. Later that night, a mutual contact told me David had been tense at a dinner. Short-tempered. Something about timing not lining up. Expansion plans slowing down. She'd gone quiet after that, scrolling through her phone more than usual. At the station, life kept moving. We trained harder. Ran longer. I started leading drills again instead of delegating them. The guys noticed. They didn't comment. On my feed, the tone shifted. Fewer group shots. More solo photos. Me running stairs at dawn. Me cleaning gear. Me standing with the city behind me, helmet under my arm. She watched every one. Her messages changed again. Less accusation. More uncertainty. She asked when I'd be home. Not to talk. Just to be there. I didn't answer. David's name stopped appearing as often on her page. The likes slowed. The comments thinned out. Structures weaken before they fall. You feel it in the walls. I stayed where I was. The shift didn't announce itself. It showed up in rooms she used to control. Her parents hosted a small fundraiser at their place, the kind that blended family with business and pretended there wasn't a difference. I wasn't invited. That was normal now. What wasn't normal was how often my name came up without me being there. Someone asked where I'd been. Someone else said they'd seen me online. Training shots. Team photos. Me looking steady. Unbothered. She laughed it off at first. Said work had been heavy. Said the department was short-staffed. She framed it like sacrifice. Like she was patient. Then one of her friends asked why she'd been showing up alone lately. Not accusatory. Curious. The kind of question that doesn't need an answer to do damage. Later that week, a client postponed a signing. Nothing official. Just a delay. David Cross didn't return her call for most of a day. When he did, the conversation was short. Efficient. He sounded distracted. At the station, someone mentioned seeing her at a restaurant across town. She was sitting across from a man who wasn't me. The table was small. The tone wasn't. I didn't respond. I didn't acknowledge it. She sent another message that night. Not angry. Not pleading. Just a line asking if we were still married. I let it sit. The next morning, she posted a photo with a caption about resilience. It didn't land. The engagement was thin. People sense when a story is being forced. By the end of the week, invitations stopped coming in her name alone. Couples-only events. Closed dinners. Networking spaces where presence implied stability. She wasn't being excluded directly. She was being overlooked. At the station, we held a retirement barbecue for one of the guys. Families showed up. Kids ran between trucks. Someone tagged me in a photo holding a plate, laughing at something off camera. She saw it within minutes. Her message came faster this time, asking why she was finding out about my life online, asking when we were going to stop pretending. I didn't answer. David's project stalled again. A permit delay became a reschedule. A reschedule became silence. She stopped tagging him entirely. By then, people had started drawing their own conclusions. Not about her, about us. And in those conclusions, she was alone. By the fourth week, the noise around her thinned out. It wasn't dramatic. No public fallout. No scenes. Just gaps where people used to be. She stopped getting invited to things that mattered. Not the open mixers or sponsored events, but the smaller rooms where decisions were shaped before they were announced. She heard about those afterward, through casual mentions, through apologies that came too late to matter. David Cross faded without explanation. One day he was everywhere. The next, he was busy, then unreachable. His assistant handled communications. His name disappeared from her calendar. The expansion talk dried up. The world he'd hinted at pulled its doors closed without slamming them. She came home earlier now. The apartment felt too quiet. She started cooking again, like routine could summon stability. She left lights on in rooms she wasn't using. She slept on her side of the bed and didn't cross the line. I stayed at the station. From there, I could see everything without being part of it. Her messages came more often, but they were shorter. Less control in them. Less certainty. She asked where I was sleeping. She asked if I was okay. She asked if she'd done something wrong. I didn't answer. At work, my world stayed solid. Alarms. Training. The rhythm of people who rely on each other without negotiation. The guys didn't ask why I was always there. They just made room. One afternoon, she showed up again. Not dressed for business this time. No heels. No blazer. She waited near the engines, hands clasped, scanning the room like she was looking for something she'd misplaced. I walked past her without stopping. Not out of spite. Out of distance. I wasn't avoiding her. I just wasn't engaging. Later, someone told me she'd stood there for a while after I left. Long enough for it to feel uncomfortable. Long enough for people to notice. That night, she sent a message that wasn't about logistics or timing. It was just her name on the screen, like she didn't know what else to say. I let it fade. Online, I kept living. Quiet posts. Nothing pointed. Nothing reactive. Enough for people to see I was fine. She watched everything. I could feel it in the timing. The way she was always just behind the moment. By then, she wasn't fighting me anymore. She was fighting the silence. The confrontation didn't happen the way she'd probably imagined it. No dramatic knock. No late-night confession. No tears in a doorway. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, in a place where emotions don't get to lead. I was finishing a report when she walked into the station again. This time she didn't wait near the engines. She came straight toward me, slower than before, like she'd already learned that rushing wouldn't work. People noticed. Conversations lowered. Someone stepped aside to give us space without being asked. She stopped a few feet away, close enough to speak. Far enough to respect the line I hadn't drawn, but everyone could see. She asked if we could talk. Not now. Just somewhere. Anywhere. I told her I was working. She said she knew. She said she'd wait. I went back to my desk. She stood there longer than was comfortable. Long enough for reality to settle in. Eventually, she left without another word. That night, she didn't text. She didn't call. The silence came from her side for the first time. It didn't last. The next evening, she found me outside the station after shift change. I hadn't planned it. She hadn't announced it. She just appeared when the doors rolled down and the noise softened. She said she didn't recognize me anymore. She said I was punishing her by disappearing. She said it wasn't fair. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct her version of events. When she finished, she waited. Expectant. Like a door had to open after a speech like that. I told her I didn't disappear. I told her I stopped showing up where I wasn't wanted. She tried to explain David. The timing. The pressure. The opportunities. She framed it like strategy, not betrayal. Like progress had required flexibility. I didn't argue. I told her I was still on shift. I told her I didn't have time for this conversation. Not tonight. She asked when. I didn't give her an answer. I walked back inside. The doors closed behind me with a sound that felt final. She stood there alone in the lot, headlights passing, city moving around her like she wasn't part of it anymore. For the first time, she wasn't chasing my attention. She was realizing she'd lost access to it. The collapse didn't come all at once. It came in fragments, spaced just far enough apart to keep her hoping between them. A deal she'd been counting on fell through quietly. No announcement. Just an email that said the timing wasn't right anymore. Another client stopped returning calls. Not hostile, just unavailable. Meetings were postponed and never rescheduled. David Cross disappeared completely. No fallout. No explanation. His name stopped circulating in the rooms that mattered. The penthouse lights went dark on her side of the story. Whatever leverage she thought she'd secured evaporated without confrontation. She tried to compensate. Longer hours. More posts. Louder confidence. It didn't translate. People sensed the instability beneath the polish. Status feeds on consistency. Once that cracks, the slide is quick. At home, the apartment turned against her. The silence got heavier. The routines she'd ignored became traps. She'd catch herself setting out 2 cups in the morning, then freeze. She stopped inviting people over. There was nothing to show anymore. She started noticing things she'd trained herself to overlook. The way I'd always check the locks before bed. The way I used to text when a call ran long, even from a burning building. The way I'd stood half a step behind her at events so she could lead without interference. Those memories surfaced at the wrong moments. In elevators. In empty rooms. In the pauses between notifications that no longer came. She came to the station once more. Didn't ask to see me. Just stood across the street for a while, watching the doors. Someone told me later. I didn't go out. Online, I posted less. I didn't need the proof anymore. My life had settled into something solid. Predictable in the best way. I slept when I could. I trained. I led. I belonged. Her messages became erratic. Sometimes long, sometimes just a sentence. She apologized without naming anything. She asked questions she already knew the answers to. She said she missed me. I didn't respond. By then, people around her had drawn their conclusions and moved on. Not with judgment. With disinterest. The worst kind. She lost her footing and realized too late that I'd been the only constant ground she'd had. And I wasn't there to catch her. I was already standing somewhere else, watching the structure finish collapsing on its own. She reached me the way people do when there's nothing left to protect. Not with demands. Not with explanations. With presence. It was early, just after sunrise, the kind of hour where the city feels unfinished. I was outside the station, gear packed, waiting for shift change to clear. She stood across the street for a long moment before crossing, like she needed to be sure I was real. She didn't look broken. She looked exposed. No armor. No performance. She said my name once and stopped there. Nothing followed it. I waited. She talked about work without selling it. About how quiet things had gotten. About how she hadn't realized how much she'd leaned on my steadiness until it was gone. She didn't mention David. She didn't justify anything. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just stood in the truth of where she was. People passed behind her. Cars moved. Life kept going. She asked if I was ever coming home. I told her I never left. I told her I stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. She nodded like she already knew that answer. Like it had been forming for weeks, and she just needed to hear it out loud. She said she understood if I was done. She said she'd accept it. Her voice didn't shake. That mattered. I didn't rush the moment. I didn't fill the space. I told her I wasn't angry. I told her I wasn't interested in punishment or leverage. I told her that whatever happened next wouldn't look like before. She listened. I said if there was going to be anything left, it would be built differently. On mutual presence. On choosing each other without an audience. Without strategy. I didn't promise anything. I didn't offer comfort. I told her I'd reach out when I was ready. Not when she needed it. She didn't argue. She stepped back. She let me have the last word without trying to take it. When I turned toward the bay doors, she didn't follow. She stayed where she was, letting the distance exist. That's how I knew it was real. I didn't disappear. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. And if I ever show up again, it will be on terms that don't require me to disappear at all.